to meet new people, and we got to try on clothes.
It's been a ton of fun. You've been super inspired by.
Who have we met lately?
On July 7th, 2017, the internet found its perfect obsession. Two identical 7-year-old girls, a brand new Instagram account, and a sudden, staggering title: the most beautiful twins in the world. Within months, their faces were a global currency, anchoring campaigns for the biggest brands on Earth. It looked like a modern fairy tale wrapped in digital gold. But the spotlight is a heavy thing for children to carry, and the fairy tale was about to face a brutal reality check. But how does a pair of 7-year-olds become a global phenomenon overnight? The ascent to the perfect crown. About the meteoric rise of Ava Marie and Leah Rose Clements, it needs a rewind to a very specific moment in digital history. It was the summer of 2017. The world of social media was undergoing a massive structural shift. Instagram was transitioning from a casual photo-sharing app into a hyper-polished, multi-billion-dollar economy driven by aesthetics, curation, and the newly minted class of the influencer. The platform's algorithm had become highly sophisticated, engineered to identify, elevate, and viralize images that captured human attention within milliseconds. And nothing captures the human eye quite like genetic lightning. Enter Jocky Clements, a mother of 3, living in the sun-drenched suburbs of Orange County, California. Jocky was no stranger to the industry. She had briefly signed the girls to a modeling agency when they were just 6 months old. But back then, the logistics were a nightmare. Trying to juggle an energetic toddler son and infant-identical twins while driving back and forth to chaotic auditions in Los Angeles felt unsustainable. She pulled them out, choosing instead to give her daughters a normal, muddy, playground-filled childhood. But as the girls grew, the whispers didn't stop. Strangers on the street would pull Jocky aside. Grocery store clerks would stop scanning items just to stare. The refrain was always the same. They look like porcelain dolls. They need to be on television. They need to be modeling. By the time the girls' 7th birthday rolled around, the cultural landscape had completely transformed. You no longer needed to spend hours sitting in traffic on the 405 freeway waiting for a casting director to notice your kids. The casting couch had been replaced by the digital grid. On July 7, 2017, the mathematically pleasing date of July 7, 17, Jocky had a gut feeling. She believed in signs, and this date felt like a cosmic green light. She sat down with Ava and Leah, who were already heavily involved in dance and swim classes, and presented an idea. I asked them if, in addition to their weekly activities, they wanted to give modeling a try, Jocky later recounted on her blog. They were obsessed with performing for anyone who would watch. They screamed with excitement. They were ready. With the girls' enthusiastic stamp of approval, Jocky snapped a few photos on an old digital camera in their garage, uploaded them to a brand new Instagram account under the handle @ClementsTwins, and went to sleep. She figured a few friends and family members would follow along. She was wrong. What happened next was the digital equivalent of a supernova. Within days, the account didn't just grow. It ruptured. A few reposts by popular kids' fashion accounts triggered an avalanche. The Instagram Explore page took the images of Ava and Leah and pushed them to millions of screens worldwide. The internet, a place usually defined by cynicism and debate, seemed to reach a rare, unanimous consensus. Users began leaving thousands of comments, using phrases like pure perfection, genetically blessed, and the 8th wonder of the world. Soon, digital publishers caught wind of the frenzy, churning out articles with titles that solidified their status. Meet the most beautiful twins in the world. Within a mere 6 months, the account skyrocketed past 130,000 followers. By the end of the year, that number breached the 500,000 mark. It was a dizzying, surreal velocity of fame. One day, you're a second grader worrying about spelling tests and recess tag. The next, your face is being analyzed, praised, and shared by millions of strangers from Tokyo to London to New York. Why did they viralize so intensely? It comes down to what media theorists call the algorithmic echo chamber. The human brain is evolutionary hardwired to seek out symmetry. Symmetrical features are unconsciously interpreted as signs of health, youth, and genetic vitality. Ava and Leah possessed a rare hypersymmetrical look, piercing blue-green eyes that contrasted sharply with their sun-kissed, honey-brown hair, framed by perfectly identical features. When Instagram's image recognition software detected users lingering on their photos for seconds longer than average, the algorithm did exactly what it was programmed to do. It fed the beast. It pushed the twins into the feeds of millions more, creating a self-replicating loop of exponential growth. This wasn't the traditional child stardom of the 90s or 2000s, where a kid had to land a role on a Disney Channel sitcom or feature film to be recognized. This was a new breed of celebrity, disintermediated, immediate, and fiercely lucrative. Before long, the traditional gatekeepers of the fashion industry realized they couldn't ignore the numbers. The numbers meant eyeballs, and eyeballs meant revenue. The top child modeling agencies in Los Angeles came knocking, practically tripping over themselves to sign the twins. Suddenly, the garage photo shoots were replaced by high-end professional productions. Ava and Leah were signed to prestigious agencies like LA Models and Eris Talent Agency. The contracts that followed were staggering. Major global powerhouses wanted a piece of the Clements magic. They landed high-profile campaigns with Nike, modeling sportswear with the effortless coolness of adult athletes. They became faces for Disney, appearing in promotional material that made them look like living princesses. Mattel brought them in, capitalizing on their doll-like features to market their iconic toy lines. Target, Skechers, and American Girl soon followed. For the twins, the initial phase of this journey felt like a grand adventure. To them, a modeling shoot wasn't a grueling corporate obligation. It was a glorified dress-up game where they got to wear beautiful clothes, hang out with their best friend, each other, and play characters in front of a flashing light. They were treated like royalty on set, pampered with hair and makeup, and showered with gifts from the brands they represented. Their older brother, Chase, was even pulled into the mix, landing his own modeling gigs as agencies realized the entire family possessed the genetic jackpot. Money was pouring in, the follower count was ticking up by tens of thousands every week, and the family's email inbox was a non-stop barrage of offers, contracts, and invitations to exclusive Hollywood events. By all outward appearances, the Clements family had successfully unlocked the ultimate modern American dream. They had built a digital empire out of thin air, using nothing but a smartphone, a free social media app, and the undeniable aesthetic appeal of their children. It was a world of pristine grids, flawless lighting, and endless praise. On the digital screen, the twins were untouchable, immortalized in a state of eternal, perfect youth. They were the golden children of the internet age, floating on a cloud of double taps and brand sponsorships. But algorithms are fickle gods, and youth, by its very nature, is a melting ice cube. As the months bled into years, the initial shock value of their viral discovery began to wear off, and the real world began to push back against the digital fantasy. When beauty fades. As the calendar flipped past the late 2010s and marched into a new decade, the landscape of social media underwent another violent mutation. The cultural zeitgeist that had eagerly crowned Ava and Leah as the undisputed queens of child modeling was shifting underneath their feet. The digital world is notoriously unsentimental. It does not harbor loyalty. It harbors an insatiable appetite for the novel, the loud, and the next. The first major challenge to their digital monopoly was the sheer democratization of internet fame. When the twins went viral in 2017, an identical twin duo dominating Instagram was a novel, hypnotic spectacle. Fast forward a few years, and the internet was practically saturated with influencer siblings, look-alike duos, and highly curated family channels. Platforms like TikTok exploded onto the scene, bringing with them a radically different aesthetic. The era of the pristine, motionless, perfectly lit Instagram grid was being cannibalized by raw, fast-paced vertical video content. Audiences no longer just wanted to look at a beautiful, silent photograph. They wanted to hear creators speak, watch them dance, see their unedited flaws, and peer into their chaotic daily lives. The digital audience's attention span had fractured into 15-second intervals. Simultaneously, a new wave of celebrity duos and twin influencers began to flood the market, capturing the collective fascination of Gen Z and Alpha. Identical twins like the D'Amelio sisters, while not twins, they captured the sibling market share. The Martinez twins, the Dolan twins, and younger sibling accounts like Tatum and Oakley Fisher began pulling in billions of views. These newer creators didn't rely on the traditional quiet elegance of high-fashion child modeling. They leaned heavily into the hyper-energetic, trend-driven, chaotic energy of modern short-form video. They did viral dance challenges, filmed prank videos, and spoke directly into the camera with an intimate, unpolished familiarity that built parasocial bonds with millions of fans. In comparison, the Clements twins brand felt legacy. It was rooted in an older form of internet celebrity, one that was beautiful to look at, but structurally detached. While their Instagram account maintained a massive, respectable following of over 2 million users, the explosive, exponential growth of their early days began to level off into a plateau. They were no longer the shiny new discovery of the global media. The sensational headlines that had once driven millions of curious clicks to their profile began to dry up, replaced by news cycles covering the next viral sensation born on a TikTok FYP For You page. This plateau brought the twins face-to-face with a complex psychological phenomenon, the flawless child expiration date. There is a unique, unspoken tragedy built into the foundation of child stardom that relies entirely on physical appearance. When the world falls in love with a 7-year-old because they look like a flawless porcelain doll, that love is inherently transactional and time-bound. Children do not remain dolls. They grow. Their facial structures change, their baby fat disappears, and they develop distinct individual adult features. As Ava and Leah entered their early teenage years, transitioning from children into adolescence, they had to navigate the jarring reality of growing up under a digital microscope. Every minor physical change was documented, uploaded, and subjected to the public court of opinion. If they changed their hair, if their skin broke out, or if they simply looked tired in a photo, the comments section would instantly fill with hyper-analytical critiques from strangers. Fans who had followed them since 2017 would comment things like, "They look so different now," or "They are losing their twin look." It is an incredibly heavy psychological burden for a young girl to realize that her primary value to millions of people was tied to a specific, fleeting window of childhood facial symmetry. The twins were forced to confront the fact that they were human beings who were aging, not static pieces of digital art meant to be frozen in time. They had to figure out who they were when the initial shock value of their identical aesthetics began to wane. Furthermore, the nature of their brand had to evolve out of sheer necessity. You cannot market a 13 or 14-year-old girl the same way you market a 7-year-old. The whimsical Disney princess shoots and the cute Mattel toy campaigns naturally fell away as they outgrew the target demographics. They had to pivot toward teen fashion, beauty, and lifestyle content, a space that is notoriously crowded, fiercely competitive, and dominated by creators who are willing to expose every intimate detail of their personal lives for views. The twins, under the careful guidance of their parents, chose a different route. They resisted the urge to turn their platform into a high-drama reality show. They didn't engage in internet beef. They didn't chase cheap clout through manufactured controversies, and they didn't compromise their privacy for a spike in engagement metrics. Instead, they focused on stabilizing their brand, transitioning smoothly from child models into teen entrepreneurs. They began taking a more active role in the business side of their likeness. They weren't just mannequins for other brands anymore. They wanted to be the authors of their own products. This led to the creation and launch of Kavia, their activewear and clothing brand designed specifically for teenagers. They spent hours sitting in design meetings, picking fabrics, reviewing samples, and figuring out how to market clothing to their own peers. It was an impressive, mature pivot that showed they were preparing for a future that extended far beyond the fickle grace of an algorithm. Yet, despite their business savvy and their steady transition into teen entrepreneurship, the metric reality remained unchanged. They were no longer the undisputed viral centers of the digital universe. The roaring waterfall of global fame had narrowed into a steady, manageable stream. They had found their niche, built their stable audience, and adjusted to a quieter, more standard, mid-tier influencer existence. They were normal teenagers who happened to have millions of followers, balancing homework and high school social dynamics with photo shoots and brand deals. The digital screen had finally settled into a predictable, controlled rhythm. The metrics were stable, the clothing line was launching, and the future seemed mapped out in clean, profitable lines. The world looked at them and saw two beautiful, successful teens who had survived the volatile currents of childhood internet fame completely unscathed. But the internet only shows you what fits within the borders of a square crop. While the girls were busy learning how to navigate the cooling temperatures of their digital fame and the complex realities of growing up online, a catastrophic storm was brewing completely outside the frame. Just as the digital metrics began to cool, the real world delivered a freeze that no one saw coming, one that would instantly strip away the glossy veneer of their perfect lives and force them to fight a battle that no algorithm could ever prepare them for. The cracks in the porcelain, the family crisis. In October 2019, the glossy, impenetrable illusion of the Clements twins' perfect lifestyle was violently shattered. To the public, Kevin Clements was a picture-perfect patriarch. A former world-class competitive swimmer who won a silver medal at the 2003 World Championships and a 14-time All-American athlete at Auburn University, Kevin was the definition of peak physical health. He worked as the head swim coach and assistant athletic director at J. Sarah Catholic High School in Southern California. He was vibrant, athletic, and fiercely active in his children's lives. Then, after a few weeks of subtle, unexplained fatigue and minor symptoms, the family received a diagnosis that felt like a punch to the gut. Kevin had T-cell acute lymphoblastic lymphoma and leukemia, a rare, aggressive, and fast-moving form of blood cancer. Instantly, the trajectory of the entire family shifted. The immediate response was medical warfare. Kevin was admitted to the hospital to begin an intense, grueling regimen of induction chemotherapy. But chemotherapy was only a temporary shield to force the cancer into remission. To survive the disease long-term, Kevin desperately needed a bone marrow transplant. For a 9-year-old child, a parent's life-threatening illness is a reality too massive and terrifying to fully comprehend. But Ava and Leah didn't have the luxury of processing this crisis in private. They were child stars, with an active audience of 1.5 million people watching their every move. They suddenly found themselves standing at a strange, heavy crossroad where their childhood innocence collided directly with a massive adult responsibility. Instead of retreating inward and shutting out the digital world, the family made a strategic, vulnerable choice. They decided to pull back the curtain on their polished lives and weaponize their massive digital footprint for survival. Ava and Leah stepped away from the stylized fashion sets and the glamorous clothing campaigns. Their Instagram feed, which had previously been a monument to coordinated outfits, soft lighting, and high-end streetwear, transformed into a real-time command center for a global bone marrow drive. The twins began recording videos directly from their bedrooms and hospital hallways, speaking with a raw, unscripted urgency that was a jarring departure from their usual curated personas. "We can help save his life, and we can help save so many other people's lives," Ava pleaded in one video, her wide, familiar blue-green eyes looking directly into the camera lens. They partnered with DKMS, an international nonprofit organization dedicated to the fight against blood cancer. The twins used their platform to demystify the process of bone marrow donation, explaining to their young fans and their parents that finding a match required nothing more than a simple, painless cheek swab. They held local, physical bone marrow drives in Southern California, pulling in crowds of fans who came not just to see the famous twins, but to get tested in the hopes of being the genetic key to saving their father. This pivot highlighted an incredibly complex psychological shift, the weaponization of influence for survival. Suddenly, the abstract metrics of social media success, the likes, the shares, the The follower counts that critics often dismissed as shallow, vanity projects became a literal life-or-death currency. The twins were forced to grow up in a matter of weeks, carrying the psychological weight of knowing that their personal celebrity was the primary tool their family possessed to broadcast a cry for help to the world. Every post was no longer about boosting an engagement rate or pleasing a fashion brand. It was a calculated attempt to find a genetic needle in a haystack. The drive was an undeniable success in terms of public awareness. Thousands of people across the globe registered as bone marrow donors specifically because they saw the Clements twins' appeal. The sheer reach of their voice brought blood cancer awareness to a completely new demographic of young internet users. However, the medical reality of bone marrow matching is strictly governed by genetics, not algorithms. Despite the massive influx of global registrants spurred by the twins' internet campaign, a perfect match wasn't found among the millions of strangers scrolling through Instagram. Instead, the ultimate miracle came from inside the family circle. Kevin's own brother, Chris, tested as a successful match. In early 2020, Kevin underwent the highly anticipated, life-saving bone marrow transplant utilizing his brother's cells. The process was physically brutal, requiring a complete depletion of Kevin's immune system before rebuilding it from scratch. The family's digital channels became a space for medical updates, showing the reality of a father fighting through the exhausting aftermath of a transplant, dealing with fluctuating blood level counts, and navigating the strict dietary and isolation protocols required for recovery. Through it all, Ava and Leah had to balance a deeply fractured existence. On one hand, they were young girls dealing with the crushing anxiety of a sick parent, an altered home environment, and the sudden loss of stability. On the other hand, they still had contractual obligations to uphold. They still had to show up to photo shoots, look radiant in front of cameras, and project an aura of effortless, aspirational joy for consumer brands, even when their minds were entirely inside a sterile hospital room. The crisis eventually passed, leaving behind a family that was profoundly changed. Kevin successfully beat the cancer, eventually entering a state of total remission. The experience anchored the family in a way that traditional Hollywood success never could. It forced the twins to understand that the digital spotlight is an incredibly volatile asset, something that can easily isolate you in a world of superficial perfection, but also one that, when directed with purpose, can rally an army of strangers to stand by you in your darkest hour. Yet, as the family fought for survival in the hospital, a different kind of battle was raging in the comments section. The architect and the business model, the mom and the money. While the digital ecosystem rallied around the family's health crisis, it also brought a simmering, long-standing public debate right back to the surface. At the center of that debate was a single figure, Jocky Clements. As the primary architect behind the @Clements Twins brand, Jocky had spent years navigating a relentless stream of public pushback. In the hypercritical court of internet opinion, a mother who builds a multi-million follower empire based entirely on her children's physical appearance is rarely viewed with neutrality. Critics frequently aimed sharp accusations her way, charging her with the commercialization and monetization of her daughters at an incredibly vulnerable age. To a vocal segment of the internet, the brand felt like a corporate machine that had stripped two young girls of their anonymity before they were old enough to comprehend, let alone consent to, the concept of a digital footprint. In public forums and comment sections, users constantly picked apart everything from the choice of outfits to the sheer frequency of the twins' online exposure, questioning where the boundary lay between a supportive parent and an aggressive business manager. This scrutiny pushed the Clements family straight into a much broader, modern cultural conversation: the ethical gray zones of the kid influencer economy. Historically, child actors and entertainers in traditional media were protected by established legal frameworks, such as the Coogan Act, which legally mandates that a portion of a child's earnings be locked away in a secure trust fund until they reach adulthood. But the Wild West frontier of social media operations possessed no such standardized safety rails. In the world of content creation, a parent isn't just a legal guardian. They are simultaneously the director, the talent manager, the lighting tech, and the chief financial officer. This blending of roles creates a highly complex dynamic where the lines between family life and corporate labor become entirely blurred. Faced with this heavy wave of continuous pushback, Jockey chose to address the critics directly rather than retreating behind a wall of silence. Through a detailed personal blog and open interviews, she routinely laid out her perspective as a mother navigating an unprecedented digital landscape. Her argument was built on a foundation of parental oversight and economic pragmatism. Aside from the fact that I don't think there is anything wrong with creating a lucrative financial safety net for my children's future, Jockey argued, the most important factor has always been the girls' autonomy. They are the ones driving this train. According to the family, every corporate shoot, brand partnership, and content project was treated as an elective activity, completely subject to the twins' personal enthusiasm. If the girls felt burnt out, if they wanted to skip an audition to go to a friend's pool party, or if they simply weren't in the mood to perform, the cameras were put away. Jockey reframed the entire operation not as a forced labor dynamic, but as a highly sophisticated modern version of an extracurricular activity that happened to yield substantial financial trust funds for college and adulthood, rather than just trophies or ribbons. As the twins matured into their teenage years, this emphasis on autonomy evolved from a defensive parenting philosophy into a concrete business model. Ava and Leah were no longer content with just being passive faces for hire. Having spent their entire childhoods observing the mechanics of the fashion industry from the inside, they understood the underlying business dynamics of digital influence. They recognized that the true power in the modern creator economy didn't belong to the models who wore the clothes. It belonged to the entrepreneurs who owned the designs. This realization sparked the birth of Kavia, the twins' proprietary clothing and lifestyle brand. Kavia wasn't a standard, passive celebrity licensing deal where a corporate design team slapped the twins' names onto pre-made garments. Instead, Ava and Leah stepped into the roles of active teen executives. They took charge of product development, sitting in creative meetings to map out seasonal collections, select specific fabrics, review prototypes, and refine fits that actively resonated with their teenage peers. The strategy was built around limited edition, high-quality capsule wardrobe drops, focusing heavily on everyday athleisure staples, versatile tops, and on-trend accessories, including collaborative eyewear releases. By stepping behind the scenes as designers, the twins shifted the narrative of their entire career. They effectively transformed their platform from a gallery of childhood symmetry into a modern B2C, business-to-consumer enterprise driven by authentic teen style. Today, that digital footprint remains an undeniable powerhouse, anchoring a highly diversified business ecosystem. With a stable following of over 2.1 million users on Instagram, a growing presence across YouTube and TikTok, and an active clothing label, the twins have successfully survived the volatile transition from viral child stars to mature teen creators. The capital generated from their early modeling contracts and current entrepreneurial ventures is locked safely within managed financial structures, giving them a level of financial independence that few teenagers globally could ever dream of. The story of the Clements twins defies the simplistic, sensationalized narratives that dominate modern internet culture. They are neither the victims of a tragic, exploitative childhood, nor the subjects of a flawless, effortless digital fairy tale. Instead, their journey serves as a highly revealing case study of what it means to grow up entirely inside the digital grid. They have lived their lives out loud, balancing the fickle currents of algorithmic fame and intense public scrutiny against the raw, grounding realities of real-world family crises. In doing so, they have shown that while you cannot control the velocity of a viral wave, you can absolutely choose how to steer the ship once the water finally calms down. So, are the twins actually happy today? By all accounts, the answer seems to be a resounding yes. Now navigating their mid-teens, Ava and Leah are no longer passive participants in a viral whirlwind. They are energetic co-captains of their own life. They have smoothly traded the intense pressure of early childhood fame for a collaborative, structured business empire, allowing them to balance their thriving clothing line with normal high school memories. Backed by a resilient family that fiercely protected their autonomy and survived a major health crisis together, the twins appear remarkably grounded, genuinely fulfilled, and completely in control of their future. One last question. Have you seen the pair on the internet, and what do you think of their journey? If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real story behind the internet's most famous faces, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below with your thought. And turn on notifications so you never miss our next script breakdown. Thanks for watching.